Chapter 1 of Book 5 of Topics by Aristotle, translated by Octavius Owen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. Upon Property. Whether what is asserted be property or not property must be examined through these places. Property is assigned either per se and always, or with relation to something else and sometimes, as the property of man per se is an animal naturally mild, but in relation to something else, as of the soul to the body, that the one commands, but the other obeys, always, as of God to be an immortal animal, but sometimes, as of a certain person to walk in the gymnasium. Nevertheless, the property assigned with reference to something else produces either 2 or 4 problems, for it is affirmed of one thing, but the same denied of another. 2 problems only arise. As of man, with regard to horse, the property is that he is a biped, for that man is not a biped may be argued by some one. Also that a horse is a biped, and in both ways the property may be removed. But if each is affirmed of each, and denied of each, there will be 4 problems, as the property of man with reference to horse is that the former is biped, but the latter quadruped, for that man is not a biped, and that he is naturally a quadruped may be argued, and that a horse is a biped, and not a quadruped, is capable of argument. In whatever way, therefore, it is shown, the proposition is subverted. That indeed is property per se, which is attributed to all, and separates from everything, as of man to be a mortal animal, capable of science. Property, on the other hand, with relation to another, is that which does not separate from everything, but from a certain definite thing, as of virtue in regard to science. The property is that the one is naturally adapted to be in many, but the other in the reasoning faculty alone, and in those who possess the reasoning faculty. Again, the property always is that which is true at all times and never fails, as of animal to be composed of soul and body. But the property sometimes is that which is true at a certain time, yet does not always follow from necessity, as of a certain man to walk in the forum. We may, however, assign property with reference to something else, when we assert that difference is either in all and always, or for the most part, and in most. For instance, in all and always, as the property of man with respect to horse is the being biped, for both always and every man is a biped, but no horse is ever a biped. For the most part, and in most, as the property of the rational in regard to the appetitive and irascible part is that the one commands, but the other obeys, since neither does the rational always govern, but sometimes is also governed, nor are the appetitive and irascible always governed, but sometimes also govern when a man's soul is depraved. Of properties, however, those are especially logical, which are per se, and always with reference to something else. For the property with reference to something else produces many problems, as also we observed before, since either 2 or 4 problems arise from necessity, wherefore many arguments originate in reference to these. Still, we may argue about what is per se, and always, in reference to many things, or observe it with regard to many times. What is per se indeed with reference to many things, for it is necessary that property should be present with a subject in regard to each thing that exists, so that if it is not separated as to all, it would not be well assigned as property. But we may observe that which is always with regard to many times, and both whether it is not present, or was not present, or will not be present, it will not be property. But the property at a certain time we observe as to the present time, wherefore there are not many arguments belonging to it, but that is a logical problem in reference to which numerous and good arguments may be framed. What therefore is stated to be property with reference to something else must be considered from the places concerning accident, viz. Whether it happens to one, but not to another. But those which are at all times and per se, we must examine by the following places. Chapter 2. Of the correct exposition of the property. First, it must be considered whether property be not well or be well explained, of the ill or well. One point indeed is, if the property is laid down, not through things which are more known, or which are more known, subverting it if not through things more known, but confirming it if through things more known. Now of the being laid down, not through things more known, one place is, if the property which a person assigns is altogether more unknown than that of which he states it to be the property, for the property will not be well laid down. For we introduce property for the sake of knowledge, wherefore it should be assigned through things more known, for thus it will be more possible sufficiently to apprehend it. For instance, since he who lays it down as the property of fire to be most similar to the soul, employs the soul which is more unknown than fire, for we know more what fire than what the soul is, it would not be well laid down as the property of fire to be most similar to the soul. Another way is, if it is not more known that this is present with that, since it is necessary not only that the property should be more known than the thing, but also that it should be more known to be present with this thing, since he who is ignorant whether it is present with this thing will not know whether it is present with this alone, so that whatever of these happens to be the case, the property becomes obscure. For instance, since he who lays down the property of fire to be that in which first soul is naturally adapted to be, uses what is more unknown than fire, if soul is inherent in this, and if it is inherent in this first, hence that in which first soul is naturally adapted to be, would not be well placed as the property of fire. We confirm property indeed, if it is placed through things more known, and if through things more known according to each mode. For according to this, property will be well placed, since of the topics capable of confirming anything well, some will show that it is placed according to this only, but others simply that it is well placed. For instance, since he who says that the property of animal is to possess sense, assigns the property through things more known, and in a manner more known, according to each mode, after this it would be well assigned as the property of animal to possess sense. In the next place we subvert it, property, if some one of the names which are assigned in the property is multifariously predicated, or if altogether the sentence also signifies many things, for the property will not be laid down. For instance, since to perceive signifies many things, one to possess sense, but another to use sense, a natural aptitude to sensation would not be well laid down as the property of animal. On this account, we must neither employ a name of multifarious signification, nor a sentence, as signifying property, because what is multifariously predicated renders the statement obscure. He who is about to argue, being in doubt which of the things multifariously predicated he, the other, means, for property is assigned for the sake of learning. Besides, there must of necessity be a certain elenchus against those who thus explain property, when in a signification in which what is proposed is false, someone frames a syllogism of what is multifariously predicated. On the other hand, we confirm it, if neither any one of the names, nor the whole sentence signify many things, for in this respect the property will be well laid down. Thus, since neither body denotes many things, nor that which is most easily moved to an upward place, nor the whole composed of these, according to this, a body which is most easily moved to an upward place would be well assigned as the property of fire. In the next place, we subvert it if that is multifariously predicated of which they assign the property, yet it is not defined of which of them the property is laid down, for the property thus will not be well assigned. On account of what reason is not obscure from what has been before said, for the same things must necessarily result. For instance, since to know this thing scientifically signifies many things, viz. That this possesses science, and that it uses science, and that there is a science of it, and that we use the science of it, the property of scientifically knowing this thing would not be well assigned when it is not defined, of which of them the property is laid down. We confirm it, however, if that of which the property is placed be not multifariously predicated, but is one and simple, for as to this the property will be well laid down. For instance, since man is predicated as one thing, it would be well laid down as to this, that the property of man consisted in his being an animal naturally mild. Again, we subvert it if the same thing has frequently been mentioned in the property, for oftentimes it escapes notice when men do this, as well in properties as in definitions. Now, the property of this kind will not be well laid down, for the frequent repetition disturbs the hearer, so that obscurity necessarily arises, and besides this men seem loquacious. Still, it will happen that the same thing is frequently repeated in two modes, the one when we often denominate the same, as if any one assigned the property of fire to be a body, the most subtle of all bodies, for he repeats the word body, and in the second place, if a man assumes definitions instead of names, as if he should give as the property of earth that it was an essence which, most of all bodies, naturally tends to a downward place, and should afterwards assume, instead of the word bodies, such essences, for body and such an essence are one and the same thing, so that he will repeat the word essence, and neither of the properties would be well placed. We confirm it indeed, if no one and the same name be frequently used, for as to this the property will be well assigned, e.g., since he who says the property of man is an animal capable of science, does not frequently employ the same name, in this respect the property of man would be well assigned. Next, property is subverted if such a name is assigned in the property as is present withal, for that will be useless which is not separated from some, but what is asserted in properties we ought to separate, as also in definitions. Wherefore, the property will not be well stated. Thus, since he who assigns as the property of science, opinion, immutable by reason, being one, uses a certain such thing in property, viz., one which is present withal, the property of science would not be well stated. On the other hand, we confirm it, if no common term has been used, but one separating from a certain thing, for in this respect the property would be well stated. Thus, since he who says the property of animal is to have a soul, uses no common term, in this respect it would be well laid down as the property of animal, that it possesses a soul. Moreover, it is subverted if a person assign many properties of the same thing, not distinguishing that he assigns many, for the property will not be well placed. For, as in definitions, it is not requisite that anything more should be added than the sentence denoting the essence, so neither in properties should anything be added, besides the sentence which constitutes what is asserted to be the property, since a thing of this kind is useless. Thus, since he who states that the property of fire is to be a body of the greatest subtlety and lightness, assigns many properties, for it is true to assert each of fire alone, it would not be well laid down as the property of fire to be a body most subtle and most light. On the other hand, he confirms property who has not assigned many properties, but one of the same thing. For as to this, the property will be well stated, thus, since he who says that the property of moisture is a body which can be brought to every shape, assigns one property and not many, in this respect property of moisture would be well stated. Chapter 3. Topics connected with property, continued. In the next place, the subverter ought to consider if he, the proposer, has used that, the property of which he assigns, or some of its subjects, for the property will not be well laid down. For the property is assigned for the sake of learning. The same thing, therefore, is similarly unknown with itself, but what is the subject of a certain thing is posterior to it, and therefore is not more known. Hence, through these, greater instruction in anything does not happen, e.g., since he who states the property of animal to be a substance, a species of which is man, uses some one of the subjects of this animal, the property would not be well stated. But the confirmer must observe if he uses neither it, nor any of its subjects, for in this respect property will be well stated. Thus, since he who lays down the property of animal to be composed of soul and body neither uses it, nor any of its subjects, the property of animal, with regard to this, would be well assigned. In the same manner, also, consideration must be paid as to the other things which do not, or which do render, a thing more known, subverting indeed, if what is opposite is used, or in short, what is simultaneous in nature, or anything posterior, for the property will not be well stated. What is opposite is indeed simultaneous in nature, but what is simultaneous in nature, and what is posterior, do not render a thing more known. For instance, since he, who states the property of good to be that which is especially opposed to evil, uses the opposite of good, the property of good would not be well assigned. On the other hand, we confirm it if nothing opposite is used, nor in short what is simultaneous in nature, nor what is posterior, for as to this the property will be well assigned, e.g., since he who lays down the property of knowledge to be a notion in the highest degree credible, uses neither an opposite, nor what is simultaneous in nature, nor what is posterior, so far as regards this, the property of knowledge would be well stated. We next subvert peculiarity, indeed, if what does not always follow has been assigned as the property, but that which sometimes happens not to be property, for the property will not be well explained, since neither will the name even be necessarily verified in respect of that in which we apprehend its being inherent, nor of what it is apprehended not to be inherent, will the name necessarily not be asserted of this. Further, besides these, neither when the property is assigned will it be clear whether it is inherent, if it is a thing of that kind as to fail. Therefore the property will not be clear, e.g., since he who places the property of animal sometimes to be moved, and to stand still, has assigned a property which is sometimes not a property, the latter would not be well laid down. On the other hand, it is confirmed if that is assigned which is necessarily always a property, for in this respect the property would be well stated, since he who asserts the property of virtue to be that which makes its possessor a worthy man, assigns that which always follows as a property, so far as regards this, the property of virtue would be well assigned. In the next place, it is subverted if some one assigning that which is now a property does not declare that he assigns what is now a property, since the property will not be well stated. For first, everything which is contrary to custom requires explanation, and for the most part all men are accustomed to assign as property that which is always consequent. Secondly, he is uncertain who does not explain whether he desire to state that which is now property, wherefore a pretext of reproof must not be given. For instance, since he who states the property of a certain man is to sit with a certain man, lays down that which is now a property, he would not place the property well if he did not speak with explanation. Nevertheless, he confirms it if, assigning what is property at present, he explains that he adduces the present property, for in this respect the property will be well stated. Thus, since he who asserts the property of a certain man to be his walking now, asserts this with a distinction, the property would be well alleged. Next, it is subverted if such a property is assigned, which is in no other way evident to be inherent than by sense, since the property will not be well placed, for everything sensible, when it is external to sense, becomes obscure, since it is not apparent whether it is still inherent, because of its only being known by sense. This indeed would be true in those things which do not always follow from necessity. For example, since he who asserts the property of the sun to be the most splendid star moved above the earth, uses such an expression in the property to be moved above the earth, which is known by sense, the property of the sun would not be well assigned, for it would be doubtful when the sun sets whether it is moved above the earth, because of sense then failing us. Property, however, is confirmed if such a kind has been given, as is not evident to sense, or which, being sensible, is manifestly inherent of necessity, for in this respect the property will be well stated. Thus, since he who lays down as the property of superficies to be that which is first coloured, uses indeed something sensible, viz. To be coloured, but of such a kind as is evidently always inherent, in this respect the property of superficies would be well assigned. Next, it is subverted if definition is assigned as property, for the property will not be well stated, since it ought not to manifest the very nature of a thing, e.g., since he who says the property of man is to be an animal, pedestrian, biped, assigns as the property of man that which signifies his very nature, the property of man would not be well assigned, but we confirm it if a property which reciprocates is assigned, yet which does not manifest the very nature of a thing, since in this respect the property would be well assigned, e.g., since he who states the property of man to be an animal naturally mild, assigns a property which reciprocates indeed, yet does not manifest the very nature of man, in this respect the property of man would be well assigned. Moreover, it is subverted if he who assigns the property does not assert what a thing is, since it is necessary with properties, as with definitions, to assign the first genus, next to add what remains, and to separate. Hence, the property which is not placed after this manner would not be well assigned. Thus, since he who asserts that the property of animal is to have a soul does not state what an animal is, the property of animal would not be well laid down. Again, we confirm it, if any one, asserting what that is of which he assigns the property, annexes what remains, for in this respect the property will be well assigned. Thus, since he who asserts the property of man to be an animal susceptible of science, by asserting what man is, assigns his property, in this respect the property of man would be well assigned. End of chapter 3 of book 5. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.